Hi, welcome to the We Are Marketing Happy podcast, a healthcare marketing podcast where we talk about the technology and innovations that make patients' lives easier. Today, I'm super excited to be joined by Lauren Howard. She is an expert in the digital health space and owns a consulting company as well as the company ElleTwo. So welcome. We're excited to have you today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited.
So let's jump directly into it because Hetty and Hab, we focus a lot, my marketing agency, we focus a lot on patient acquisition and the consumer experience, but I love how what you do on the consulting side is much more on the operational and clinical side of digital health. So I'd love just to kind of set the stage around what you have seen happening over the last couple of years from your perspective on the digital health, telehealth scene.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's been a pretty interesting evolution. And I think, in 2019, we had customers that would tell us it was going to take them years to implement telehealth, which was the timeline then. There was no sense of urgency for it. And if there was, it was kind of a one-off bizarre scenario or not typical scenario. They were, 6 to 12 months for implementation was really standard, especially among large organizations. Then obviously the pandemic happened. Yeah. People who told us the first week of March 2020 that it would be a year, all of a sudden we're implementing in 48 hours. And that made it very clear that this was all bureaucratic red tape and not actual organizational timelines, which is the reality of working with large healthcare systems. And I get that. But if, as we progressed over the next couple of years, I think obviously we saw this huge push toward digital health and to getting things as automated as possible, which was happening in the marketplace before, but nobody really took it seriously. And it was very much piecemeal things that they were doing. And then, so we had this heavy focus first on like, get whatever solution you possibly can because we have to fix this immediately. Then to, 6 months or a year into the pandemic, all right, let's find the right solution as opposed to whatever was immediately available. And so there was a shift there. And it led a lot of companies, not necessarily healthcare organizations, because I feel like healthcare organizations had a different perspective on it, but it led a lot of companies to really, really push towards super automated, non-human oriented products so that we were building things that could completely automate your check-in process or completely automate your patient acquisition process or all of these things that were supposed to be AI driven and super automated. And some things like that on the clinical side as well, some AI driven tools on the clinical side. And what I'm seeing more and more now and what's coming to me more now in my own company is people who are coming to me and saying, we want to put the human back in healthcare. We want to get the clinicians back in care management rather than thinking that we're going to have an app do it. Now, is it better when you have good tools? Absolutely. But good tools don't do much if you don't have a clinical infrastructure. And so I'm seeing a shift back toward that. It is not as obviously as quick and hapless as the initial shift to telehealth was in March 2020, which is probably a good thing. But I think we have tried really hard for 2 years to take the people out of things, which people who were in healthcare knew was never going to work. We could fix things, we could improve things, but you can't take the clinicians and you can't take the support staff out of healthcare and think patients are going to actually, get the care that they need or follow through on things. That's just not the care model. So I think that's really what we're seeing now. And those are the kinds of clients that are coming to us is, okay, we've got the app, but now we need to figure out how to actually get providers engaged with it. We need to figure out how to get providers back into the ecosystem. We need to re-enfranchise providers who have been burned out and overwhelmed by the last several years. And the conversation is shifting a little bit, toward this much more human-centered, whether human-centered is the patient or human-centered is actually providing real care management with humans as opposed to app-centered care management, which I think people have been pushing toward in the last couple of years.
Yeah. Are you seeing more focus and interest and success on synchronous or asynchronous solutions right now?
That's a really good question. From a telehealth perspective, it really, really depends on the complexity of the care that needs to be delivered. I would not be surprised if the influx of asynchronous solutions really ramps downward over the next couple of years because it's just not the same as far as care delivery is concerned. And I don't see as many companies trying to get into what is now a flooded marketplace and provide totally asynchronous care. There are people who are doing it. They're doing it pretty well. They have a care model. I'd be very surprised if we see a whole lot more of that. But I do have a lot of people coming to me saying we need to figure out how to reintroduce synchronous care. And obviously distance care that for the most part is a supplement to the in-person care that they're getting and should be. Like there aren't a lot of worlds where telehealth is enough care for somebody with, who isn't a healthy 30-year-old. We need, no telehealth expert is going to tell you that telehealth is the answer for everything. It's not. It is a way to increase care. It is a way to reduce barriers to care, but it certainly does not actually undo the need for care in a lot of other situations. So I think we're going to see a switch toward more synchronous care. And I think a lot of that is going to be driven by whatever Medicare chooses to make official in whatever their next ruling is. If they will actually cover synchronous telehealth for most use cases and CMS is behind it, other payers will follow suit. It will be easier to get people who are over the age of 50 using telehealth. And we can do better education campaigns for those groups on how to make telehealth work, and those groups are really the groups where you need the heavy clinical influence. So
let's talk a little bit about if you're thinking about telehealth specifically as an industry, there have been so many specific use case or specific problem solving telehealth companies pop up, become unicorns, and then lay off lots of people in the last 6 months. And then there's also hospital systems and larger healthcare groups that are actually implementing telehealth as part of their practice as an extension of the clinician care. So I think it's interesting. What similarities or differences do you see between these groups as far as the benefit to the patient?
There's a whole nother rant in me on VC funded care and those care models and people building healthcare companies with the idea that they would just go back and fundraise rather than having runway. I can rant about that forever. Let me just say there was never a healthcare company or a telehealth company worth $4 billion. Not at least a new one. Let's be honest. So there are a lot of things that have happened in the telehealth space in the last couple of years that absolutely built a business model on a short-term emergency. And yes, COVID's going to be around for a long time, but at some point we were going to get to business as usual and people were not going to be desperate to get care on their phones. And then also there's this other competitive aspect of it where if you take a large investment from somebody, nobody's giving you money that they don't want back.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it creates this intense pressure to find care models that will deliver. And that means care models that other people aren't doing for a reason. And maybe it's compliance, maybe it's prescribing rules, maybe it's just not ethical. So I think that's why we have seen this huge combination of obviously the influx that it created with the pandemic, but also this really huge investment in flooding the market with money that had to be paid back. And you have to hit revenue targets to pay those things back. And if you have an inflated valuation, you have inflated revenue targets.
Exactly. And then whenever you begin expanding your services and focus outside of your core value proposition in order to meet those revenue targets, then you're not doing what's best on behalf of the patient.
Exactly. And so it is not surprising to me that we have seen so many expansions and contractions. And not to say that everybody made bad decisions or revenue driven decisions. I just think, it was a bunch of eager entrepreneurs who were building companies who easily got capital the first time and assumed it would be easy the second time. And so they weren't working with runway. They weren't working with, they weren't focused on the things that make it a healthy company. I saw a LinkedIn post yesterday that basically said, we shouldn't be celebrating capital raises because you have to pay that money back. if you have a capital raise, it means your company is not profitable.
Yep, exactly.
And so I was like, I think I responded to it with like, can we be best friends? Because I think that's the point. Like, is it great that somebody believes in you enough to invest in the company? Yeah, but like, let's talk about that for what it is. That's taking on debt with an idea that you'll be able to pay it out at a huge multiple.
Exactly.
And how do you reach that huge multiple? And so from a health tech kind of startup perspective, I have, again, I could rant for hours on that, and I'm not going to subject anybody to that. I'll just let that happen in my head. But on the health system side of things, they struggle, but very differently. And it is because, you probably see health systems with 6 or 8 different telehealth platforms because people think telehealth is telehealth when the reality is ambulatory telehealth or outpatient telehealth or inpatient telehealth or residential telehealth, or even telehealth that is geared toward geriatric patients, telehealth that is geared toward young people, mental health, like all of those have different needs. They have different workflows. They have different implementations. Telehealth, I've frequently seen telehealth being implemented into nursing homes, which is fine. Like, obviously, if we can get more care or more availability of care into nursing homes, great. But you can't do a patient-based connection in a nursing home because who's going to catch the link? If you have a patient that is, severe, has severe dementia, they're certainly not going to be operating a mobile phone or an iPad to get on the visit.
Exactly.
And then you have high turnover. So the staff sometimes doesn't know how to use the system. And you don't even necessarily know what patients are available to be seen that day because things change. And so you need something that's basically like an open-ended video connection that can go from room to room. That doesn't require tools for charting. It doesn't require patient IDs. It doesn't require names and dates of birth. It requires secure links and that you want a telehealth connection always to be secure, but we don't need to credential in for that data. And when you add these security features that make outpatient telemedicine so secure that it's safe to use when the patient's at home and the provider's at the office or wherever, you actually preclude nursing home patients from using that system because there's no way to really easily build that structure. And so I think that's really the challenge in the health system perspective is a lot of times they go into procurement thinking we're going to get the one platform that's going to serve all of our patients.
Sure.
And if you don't have somebody who truly understands kind of the dynamism of telehealth and how in the same way that a psychiatrist's exam room is different than a GP's exam room, the telehealth platform has to represent those differences as well. It can get really muddy. And so and then also there's a lot of pressure within the health system environment to integrate with existing systems that nobody's using. The uptake on something on some of these patient portals and these patient engagement systems is really low. But then to use telehealth, they often kind of force patients to get information through those systems that they are resistant to using to begin with. Whereas if you were to just set it up so that somebody within the office can send out a link, the patient can click the link and get in without having to get all of their notifications through whatever this primary system is, you're reducing friction, you're not increasing it. And so, so I think that's really the challenge on the health system side. And we're going to probably be seeing that for a while.
Yeah. Interesting. So what advice would you give to a health system if they were looking at moving into procurement to be able to begin identifying telehealth systems for their different lines of business or service lines? What advice would you give them to be able to properly understand the needs?
Don't have your C-suite or your procurement VPs making the decisions. Not that they shouldn't make the final decision. But what I used to see all the time is the high level people make the decision without consulting the people who are actually using the system. And then they would never launch because the people who would use the system would go, there's no way this is going to work in our environment. This doesn't replicate anything that we're doing right now. And it's way too cumbersome, or we're missing information, or we have to make phone calls in advance because the telehealth system doesn't have enough information in it. And so first thing is really, really look at who's launching telehealth and when. If you're doing a phase launch, that's great, but we should be talking to everybody in those phases to make sure that you are getting as few systems as possible. And also recognize when you have somebody that has a telehealth need that absolutely does not align with anybody else's, and maybe it makes sense to do a smaller contract for a smaller group than to try to force a square peg into a round hole with another system. And then I would really advise, find somebody who knows telehealth in all of its iterations, so they can say, like, this is not the system I would use. I think this is going to be cumbersome, or everybody but dermatology will love this system. Dermatology needs a system that's going to give them access to high quality cameras so they can really look at lesions and abrasions and things like that. And that's just pulled out of thin air, but that's the kind of stuff that people don't think about. And that's what usually leads to failures to launch.
I love it. So what do you see is coming up next? What innovations or movement in this industry do you think are going to either change the landscape or allow for better patient adoption over the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think two things are going to happen. And I think we're already seeing a little bit of, actually, we're seeing a little bit of both already. But first thing is we are going to get away from a bunch of multi-purpose telehealth platforms. So I don't think we're going to have 10, 15, 20 major players for general practice telehealth or, you know, multi-specialty telehealth. Like, I don't think we're going to see a lot more, we're not going to see a lot more investment in that or new companies. And I think we might actually see contraction. I think companies are going to start absorbing each other. And this is entirely my own hypothesis, not proven by anything entirely. And the other side of it is, I think what we are going to see as far as new innovative companies that are highly successful are very much niche based. So they're going to find their patient population. It may be a small one, but a small one that has historical trouble getting care. And so they're going to be willing to invest in their own care because it's available to them through this service. And you will see really, really successful niche environments, like programs specifically for diabetics, programs specifically for people with autoimmune disease, maybe even beyond that, like programs specifically for people with rheumatoid arthritis or lupus or something like that. So that care is becoming very much centralized to what the patient actually needs, and you can go find your environment, because overall we're seeing people moving toward communities that they're comfortable in, and this kind of global idea that it's okay to be whoever you are, find the people that support that. And I think healthcare is going to move in that direction as well, which is you don't need to go to a doctor who specializes in every gastroenterological illness. You can go to this doctor who specializes in IBS and who speaks your language. And so I think we're really going to see pushes toward that kind of very niche-based care from a digital perspective that supplements the in-person care that you may be getting from your general practitioner or whatever.
Oh, I love it. Well, Lauren, thank you so much for being on today. I'm going to do a link to your LinkedIn profile so folks can reach out to you. But how else can folks reach out to you?
Yeah, so my LinkedIn, I'm active on there all the time. My email address is on my website as well as my LinkedIn. You can shoot me a LinkedIn message. And then my assistant is also available on LinkedIn and linked through my page. And she is way easier to get than me. So if you need anything from me, reach out to her. And
I love it.
One of us will be available.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I look forward to following along and seeing which of your predictions, if not all of them, come true.
All righty. Well, it was so great to talk to you. Thank you so much for having me on.
Same to you. Take care.